everybody? Eric again. Like and subscribe. Here we go. Let's read about the album Heroes. Heroes is the 12th studio album by the English musician David Bowie, released on the 14th of October 1977 through RCA Records. Recorded in collaboration with the musician Brian Eno and the producer Tony Visconti. It was the second release of his Berlin trilogy, following Low, released in January the same year, and the only one wholly recorded in Berlin. Sessions took place in mid-1977 after Bowie completed work on Iggy Pop's second solo album, Lust for Life. Much of the same personnel from Low returned for Heroes, augmented by guitarist Robert Fripp. The majority of the tracks were composed on the spot in the studio, the lyrics not being written until Bowie stood in front of the microphone. The music builds upon its predecessors' electronic and ambient approaches, albeit with more positive reviews, atmospheres, and passionate performances. The album also follows the same structure as its predecessor, Side 1 featuring more conventional rock tracks, and Side 2 featuring mostly instrumental tracks. The cover photo, like Iggy Pop's The Idiot, is a nod to the painting Rock'n'Roll by the German artist Erich Hickel. Upon release, Heroes was a commercial success, peaking at number 3 in the UK and number 35 in the US. It was the best received work of the Berlin trilogy on release. NME and Melody Maker each named it their respective album of the year. Bowie promoted the album extensively with television appearances and interviews. He supported Low and Heroes on the Isolar 2 World Tour throughout 1978, live performances from which appear on multiple live albums. Heroes has received enduring praise, particularly recognized for Fripp's contributions and the album's place within Bowie's long-term artistic development. Though critical opinion has viewed Low as the more groundbreaking record, Heroes is regarded as one of Bowie's best, most influential works. The title track, initially unsuccessful as a single, has remained one of his best-known and most acclaimed songs. An altered and obscured version of the cover artwork was later used for the cover of The Next Day, 2013. Heroes has been reissued several times and was remastered in 2017 as part of the box set A New Career in a New Town, 1977 to 1982. Background, further information, Low, David Bowie album, Lust for Life, Iggy Pop album. In the second half of 1976, David Bowie and his friend, Iggy Pop, relocated to the Château de Horreville in Horreville, France, to escape from the drug culture of Los Angeles. There, Bowie produced Pop's debut studio album, The Idiot, 1977, and recorded his own, Low, in collaboration with the musician Brian Eno and the producer Tony Visconti. The album was the first in what came to be known as Bowie's Berlin trilogy. Though it was released in January 1977, receiving little to no promotion from both RCA Records and Bowie himself, who instead opted to tour as Pop's keyboardist. After the tour's completion, Bowie and Pop returned to Hansa Studio in West Berlin, where they recorded Pop's next solo album, Lust for Life, from May to June 1977. By the time he finished Lust for Life, Bowie was ready to begin work on his next record. He and Eno spent a few weeks devising concepts and ideas for the new album before they were joined by Visconti, who was busy with other commitments. Production, studio, and personnel. For the album, Bowie, Visconti, and Eno regrouped at Hansa Studio 2 in West Berlin. Although the album was the second installment of Bowie's Berlin trilogy, it was the only one recorded entirely in Berlin. The studio was a former concert hall converted into a recording studio that had been used by Gestapo officers during World War II as a ballroom. The studio was located about 500 yards from the Berlin Wall, leading Bowie to describe it as the hall by the wall. Describing how the location of the studio affected the creative process, Visconti recalled, "Every afternoon, I sat down at a desk and set 3 rushing red guards looking at us with binoculars, with their Sten guns over their shoulders, and the barbed wire, and I know that there were mines buried in that wall, and that atmosphere was so provocative and so stimulating and so frightening that the band played with so much energy. Despite the dark atmosphere, Visconti particularly had an exciting time creating the album, saying it was one of my last great adventures in making albums. Most of the album was recorded with the same personnel as its predecessor, Low, with Carlos Alomar, George Murray, and Dennis Davis as the core band. Bowie played the piano, having gotten significantly more experience playing the instrument during his time with Pop. In addition to the lineup was the guitarist Robert Fripp, formerly of the band King Crimson, who was recruited at Eno's suggestion. The guitarist recalled, "I got the phone call from Brian Eno when I was living in New York in July 1977. He said that he and David were recording in Berlin and passed me over. David said, 'Would you be interested in playing some hairy rock and roll guitar?' I said, 'Well, I haven't really played for 3 years, but if you are prepared to take a risk, so will I.' Shortly afterward, a first-class ticket at Lufthansa arrived. Upon his arrival to the studio, Fripp sat down and recorded lead guitar parts for tracks he had never heard before. He also received little guidance from Bowie, who had yet to write lyrics or melodies. Fripp completed all his guitar parts in 3 days. Fripp's playing received significant praise from Visconti and Eno, who were impressed with Fripp's ability to play for songs he had never heard before with such virtuosity. According to the biographer Nicholas Pegg, Fripp was not Bowie's first choice. Michael Walther of the German band Nay had originally been approached to contribute, but shortly before the sessions began, he was contacted by an unknown person and informed that Bowie had changed his mind, although later interviews with Bowie suggested otherwise. While producing other Bowie records, Visconti found that new ideas were flowing at a consistent basis, and because of this, sometimes they tended to be forgotten. In order to counteract this, he kept a 2-track tape running at all times. Murray recalled Tony had the insight to see what was happening in rehearsal, so he just switched on the tape machines and let them run. Visconti himself later recalled, "It came in handy so many times because we'd get lost. We'd start with an idea, then go in the wrong direction, and after an hour, we'd say, 'How did this start again?'" During the sessions below, Visconti became frustrated with the lack of studio staff present at the Chate. At Hansa, however, he was assisted by in-house engineer Eduard Mayer, whom Visconti recalled was critical in maintaining a positive atmosphere. Likewise, the mode during Heroes was brighter and more optimistic than the sessions below. Bowie in particular was in a healthier state of mind. He and Visconti would travel around Berlin frequently, and one on such occasion, they met Antonio Moss, a local jazz singer who would go on to provide backing vocals on Heroes. Recording process. According to the biographer Thomas Jerome Seabrook, the recording process for Heroes began at a very quick pace, following along with Low's process, with the basic backing tracks for side 1 being completed in just 2 days. As per engineer Colin Thurston, rough demos were recorded with himself on drums, Visconti on bass, and Bowie on keyboards, which the musicians heard once before recording, although he fed Davis's drums through his Eventide H910 harmonizer on Low. Visconti used it sparingly on Heroes, only during the mixing stage, and as such, the drum sound is atmospheric to the room. David also added congas and timpani to his set to take advantage of the large studio space. Visconti gave high praise to Davis, calling him one of the best drummers I've ever worked with, further calling Alomar and Murray amazing musicians. You'd just throw a few chord changes at them, and they won with it. In an interview with NME later in the year, Eno said the initial phase of recording was all done in a very casual kind of way, but we gave very brief instructions, then the band would play. Hesitant at first, Eno found the process surprisingly effective, with most tracks being done in one take. Eno stated, "We did second takes, but they weren't nearly as good." Overall, Eno had a much greater role on Heroes than he had for Low, being credited as co-author on 4 of the 10 songs, leading Steve Brook to call it the truer collaboration. Eno himself stated, "We both worked on all the pieces all the time." Eno would act as assistant director to Bowie, giving feedback to the musicians and suggesting new and unusual ways to approach the tracks. One of these ways was the employment of Eno's Obloquy Strategies cards. According to Chris O'Leary, these cards were part fortune cookie, part Monopoly chance cards, intended to spark creative ideas. Although these cards were used greatly throughout the larger sessions, Eno and Bowie only used them on Heroes when creating the instrumentals, including a V2 Schneider, Sense of Duct, and Moss Garden. Following the initial sessions in July, recording for Heroes became more sporadic, with overdubs, vocals, and mixing lasting until August. Like its predecessor, lyrics weren't written or recorded until all but Bowie and Visconti departed. Super Characteristics, the stage of recording as sporadic bursts of inspiration surrounded by younger stretches of contemplation. When making The Idiot and Just for Life with Iggy Pop, Bowie became fascinated with Pop's ability to improvise lyrics while standing at the microphone. For Heroes, he decided to use the same method. Visconti later attested he never had a clue what he sang about until he actually walked in front of the microphone. Bowie usually completed his vocals in only 1 or 2 takes. Visconti provided backing vocals in the same fashion. The final mixes were done at Mountain Studios in Montreux, Switzerland, a studio that would become one of Bowie's main stays. An engineer at Mountain, David Richards, would also become one of his regulars. Richards' assistant was Eugene Chaplin, the son of silent film star Charlie Chaplin. Music and lyrics. As the second release of the Berlin Trilogy, the music on Heroes expands on the material found on its predecessor, Low. The songs have been described by Consequence of Sound as art rock and experimental rock, while also further containing Bowie's work in the electronic and ambient genres. Like its predecessor, the songs on Heroes emphasize tune and atmosphere rather than guitar-based rock. However, they are more positive in both tune and atmosphere than the songs of its predecessor. The author, James Perron, considers it more accessible, while Visconti described it as a very positive version of Low. Biographer Paul Turncock writes that the record invokes both past and future. It also follows the same structure as its predecessor, with side 1 featuring more conventional tracks and side 2 featuring mostly instrumental tracks. The author, Peter Doggett, writes that Worry's Low featured lyrics of autobiographical nature. The lyrics of Heroes were obloquy and often deliberately evasive and were sung with an astonishing amount of passion. Visconti recalled that lyrics were made up on the spot, with Bowie sometimes ad-libbing entire songs, singing at the top of his lungs. Songs of this instance included Joe the Lion, a tribute to the American artist Chris Burden, who was known for his outlandish publicity stunts, and Blackout, which references the New York City blackout of 1977. Like the second side of Low, the imagery of the Berlin Wall dominates Heroes throughout. A kiss between Visconti and Moss at the foot of the wall inspired a lyric for the title track. Bowie's vocal for Heroes goes from calm and playful to a near scream, a style he called Bowie histrionics. Musically, Fripp's guitar feedback dominates throughout, while the bass pulsates and Eno's synthesizers blend into the background, not the black. Bowie explained the song as about facing reality and standing up to it, and finding joyness in life. David Buckley particularly highlights the lyric, "We can be heroes just for one day," as an acknowledgement that the future didn't belong to him anymore, but to everyone. Sons of the Silent Age was the only song written before the sessions began, and was originally intended to be the album's title track. The lyrics are influenced by the works of Joe Brel, and follow several characters that are in O'Leary's words. Pote, part Homo Superiors, less part of Bally Brothers. Musically, the song is noted by biographers as different than the rest of the songs on the album, and that the themes present reflect ideals from the previous decade rather than the contemporary, while O'Leary likens its sound more to that of Hunky Dory 1971 than the rest of the album. Biographers also consider the album's closer The Secret Life of Arabia as a pursuer to what Bowie would explore on Lodger. The instrumentals are described by Buckley as dark and gloomy. Sense of Doc puts on repeating four-note piano motet against a set of synthesizers to paint an image of a barren landscape. Bowie plays the Japanese instrument kuto on Mouse Garden, which together with Sense invoke a sound resembling aeroplanes flying overhead. Bowie further emphasizes his fascination with Japan by stating he's under Japanese influence in Blackout. Mouse Garden segues into Nagan, which is named after a quarter in Berlin. The track uses sound to capture the feeling of despair and desperation that the Turkish immigrants who lived there experience. The majority of Low was influenced by krautrock bands such as Tangerine Dream, Kraftwerk, and No. Earlier in 1977, Kraftwerk named Schacht both Bowie and Iggy Pop on the title track of Trans-Europe Express, which was Kraftwerk's response to the title track of Station to Station, although the influence of Kraftwerk and Harmonia are less prominent on Heroes in favor of A Jar of Fruits. Bowie paid tribute to naming the album by naming the album after Knowles' track Hero from their album, Night 2775, with V2 Schneider is inspired by and named after Kraftwerk's Florian Schneider. However, many British listeners assume V2 was a reference to the type of rockets used by the German army in World War II. V2 Schneider is also notable for having an offbeat saxophone part played by Bowie, who began the take on the long beat but decided he liked it better and kept it as is. Artwork. The cover photo was taken by the Japanese photographer Masayoshi Sakita at Hawashuchika Studios in Tokyo, Japan in April 1977. Like the artwork for Iggy Pop's The Idiot, the cover is a nod to German artist Ira Kickel's paintings Rock and Roll and Young Man, the former of which Bowie witnessed during a visit to the Baroque Museum in Berlin. Pegg describes Bowie's pose as a wild-eyed Bowie locked in the ragged pose of serio-comic agitation, raising a flat palm, as though he has just memorably lifted the final mask of artifice from his face. In an interview with Charles Shaw Murray of NME, Bowie said that the quotation marks in the title indicate a dimension of irony about the word heroes, or about the whole concept of heroism. Visconti would later state that the album was heroic, and that it was a very positive period of Bowie's life, and during the making of the album, everyone felt like heroes. Regarding the title, Bowie said, "I thought I'd pick on the only narrative song to use as the title, gripping he could, have titled it The Sons of Silent Ages." Release and promotion. The title track was chosen as the lead single and released on the 23rd of September 1977, with fellow album track V2 Schneider as the B-side. It was released in a shortened edited form in the hopes of more airplay, but Buckley believes this edit results in the song losing some of its dramatic appeal. It was supported by a music video, shot in Paris and directed by Nick Ferguson, that features Bowie in the same jacket as on the album, covered against a backdrop of white light. For the German and French releases of the single, titled Helden and Heroes respectively, Bowie recorded his vocals in both languages, with lyrics translated by Antonio Mas for the German release. Despite the song's later mass acclaim, it was initially a failure, peaking at number 24 on the UK singles chart and failing to chart in the US. Peg and Chris O'Leary note that it wasn't until Bowie's Live Aid performance in 1995 that the song became recognized as a classic. Bowie later remarked in 2003, "This is a strange phenomenon that happens with my songs stateside. Many of the crowd favorites were never radio or chart hits, and Heroes tops them all." RCA issued Heroes on the 14th of October 1977 with the catalog number RCA PL 12522. Its release came amid the punk rock movement, whose music and fashion had been influenced by Bowie. RCA marketed Heroes with the slogan, "There is old wave, there is new wave, and there's David Bowie." Turnka praises the slogan as a masterful piece of positioning that allowed David to remain aloof from a punk movement that, like Lamb before it, would turn into a parody of itself. Unlike Low, Bowie promoted Heroes extensively, conducting numerous interviews and performing on various television programs, including Mark, Bing Crosby's Merry Old Christmas, where he recorded Peace on Earth / Little Drummer Boy with Crosby, and Top of the Pops, where he performed the title track. The album was a commercial success in the UK, peaking at number 3 on the UK Albums Chart, and remained on the chart for 33 weeks. It fared favorable in the US, where it peaked at number 35 on the Billboard Top LPs and Tape chart, spending 19 weeks on the chart. Doggett writes that the album ended a string of 8 top 20 albums in the US, becoming his worst-selling album there since 1971's Hunky Dory. RCA released Beauty and the Beast as the second single on the 6th of January 1978, with Sense of Doubt as the B-side. It became a minor success in the UK, peaking at number 39 on the UK singles chart, staying on the chart for 3 weeks. NME editors Roy Carr and Charles Shaar Murray remarked that its jarring and threatening edge absolutely put off a great many of the floating singles buyers, attracted by the intoxicity reminiscence of its immediate predecessor. The single was released in the US and Spain on a 12 promo and in the 5-minute extended form, which failed to chart despite having 1975's Fame as the B-side. Bye for now.